Hello and welcome everyone to the Plants and Policies podcast. My name is Ina Maria Toncescu. I'm joined by my very amazing researcher, Maddie Youngman. We are both working at Canadians for Responsible Food Policy, and Maddie is joining me from University of Alberta, and I'm joining from Toronto, Canada. Maddie, I'm going to just hop right into this podcast and I'll let you introduce yourself a little bit.
Hi, I'm really excited to be here with you introducing this podcast. And I am a researcher and I'm a grad student at the University of Alberta, as Ina mentioned. And I live in Edmonton with my partner and my dog.
Amazing. I guess I should also mention that I am a cat mom of 4 cats, potentially 5 if I lose my mind just a little bit more. But yeah, I wanted to kind of give everyone a little bit of background. We decided to start this podcast, funnily enough, because we were literally having a conversation and I was asking Maddie about just some research that we had found, and I wanted her to explain a little bit more. One of the things that I always found with research is that it's very hard to understand when you're just someone that's just hasn't never read research, someone who hasn't been in academics. And I think it's very important for as much of the public to understand the research. So I asked Maddie some questions. Maddie ends up answering with this beautiful answer. And I am sitting there going, first of all, we should put this in a podcast. And second of all, why are we not recording this right now? This is great information for us to share.
So then, boom, a podcast.
Amazing. So I wanted to describe some of the findings that we have using this podcast. I want this to be a platform for everyone to be able to click into some of the research that's out there, that's being done, that's super important to bring to the public, especially those who are new to food policy or normal people who could really use the accessibility of an informative podcast like this. So a lot of this podcast is going to be information based. A lot of it is going to be based on anything surrounding plants and policies. So very much policy and food policy specifically. And then we're eventually going to invite others in to share their opinions and also, of course, their research and the things that they found. The ultimate goal for me is to bring as much information to the public as possible, as it is for Maddie's. I'm speaking on their behalf. And I think it's going to be very important for us to break this down as basic as possible for everybody to get. And I think this podcast is a great avenue to do that.
Exactly. We really want to be able to provide really extremely complex information to everyday people really interested in these conversations that we're going to plan to discuss, just to create the space to talk about these issues openly and also providing research to back it all up.
Yeah, exactly. For our very first podcast, actually, as in this one right now, I want to share a little bit about how we got here. Are and where we are going with this podcast. We really want to talk a little bit about ourselves so that you can get to know us a little bit more. I guess I'll start. So I mentioned that I am the managing director at Canadians for Responsible Food Policy. I'm also a business consultant, and I mainly work with nonprofit organizations and plant-based food businesses. And I very much can see that everyone shares the same struggles that there are in the current food system. I am also an activist. I am very much an activist for the animals and also for the environment. I very much believe that everything is interconnected and that in order for us to see a thriving planet, we must address all of the issues that we have with the current food system. And I'm very involved with that overall in just my daily, just business, personal life, everything. I am a cat mom of 4 amazing cats, and I am also someone who absolutely loves nature. So every time I go kayaking, I imagine, what if this is the last time I'm going to see this? Because slowly and slowly it's being taken away from me. What about everyone else after me? And I get very invested in that thought. So kayaking is as much of a therapeutic thing for me as it is something that reminds me of the work that we have to do to get ahead and to start healing the damages that we've done to our planet and to our human health as well. So I'll leave it at that. And Maddie, why don't you go ahead and give us a little bit more background?
Yeah, so as we mentioned a few minutes ago, I'm a graduate student at the University of Alberta, currently working on a master's degree in gender and social justice, but I also hold a master's degree in philosophy from the University of Alberta. I'm also a researcher at Canadians for Responsible Food Policy, and I've been working with them since 2022. In this research, I look at many different things, but first and foremost, I look at the social justice aspects of food policy, and the sustainability of food production and consumption in Canada. I thought I would share some interesting facts that I've come across in my research over the last 2-ish years. The first is that in the Eat Lancet report entitled Food in the Anthropocene, the Eat Lancet Commission on Healthy Diets from Sustainability, from Sustainable Food Systems in 2019, they mention a reference diet, which they recommend that we follow in order to remain within planetary boundaries. So they take into planetary health, but they also take into account health and nutrition guidelines for everybody on the planet. So looking at the entire globe. So this means that there are some less environmentally sustainable foods that we would see in Canada, but in other parts of the world, it might be a little bit more practical for them to beat malnutrition. So they sort of have a wide range of nutrition in this recommendation diet. So the one thing that I found most interesting was that in this report, in the reference diet, they suggest that to be the healthiest and most eco-friendly that you can and sustainable that you can, the globe per person should eat about 1.5 eggs per week. Can you believe that? Per week.
Per week. A little wild, I have to be honest with you, because I actually remember, I don't know about anyone else, and honestly, listeners can always chime in after the fact in the podcast, by the way. And we'd always follow up with any comments from the previous week. But I don't know about you all, but I see like 2 or 3 eggs per morning, and then sometimes also have other baked goods that also obviously had egg in them as well. Obviously you don't do that anymore, but it's quite heavy. I also think about the human health side of things, where each egg is like 90 milligrams or something of cholesterol. It's quite a lot. Ever since I have gone on a plant-based diet, I do not have cholesterol despite it genetically running high in my entire family's genetics. So that is very wild. I will say as well, by the way, is anything that we're actually quoting in this podcast, I'm going to follow up with all of our guests. Obviously, Maddie's going to be the most important one for me to follow up with, because there's going to be a lot more research we bring you, but we're going to quote all of this on our website. So the podcast is going to have a home on our website at responsiblefoodpolicy.ca. And then we're going to have all of these quoted things. And then if you ever want to chime in, you can just email us at hello@responsiblefoodpolicy.ca, and we'll be able to address this in the next podcast, like I said. But yeah, wow, shocking. 1.5 eggs per week. How exactly would one split that? Do you boil it in advance?
I don't know. Maybe share it with somebody. Share.
Yeah.
You say, I'll make an egg.
Yeah.
You can, or you can I guess you scramble them and then you just divide
Sprinkle
it. It
Wow.
really
Yeah.
shocked
So
me.
shocked.
It
Yeah.
really shocked me because when I
Yeah.
was not plant-based as well, like I thought that eggs were probably the most healthy protein that you could get. And so eating like 3 or 4 at a time when I was an athlete and like, a teenager I was like, wow, I'm doing such good things for my body. And, there's a whole whole bunch of other things like cholesterol, like you mentioned, and sodium and stuff like that are just like not really well known about a lot of animal products. So that was really shocking to me because yeah, we sort of normalize this whole, 3 to 4 eggs, maybe a day for some, but for others,
Mhm.
maybe a week. And
Mhm.
yeah, they
Mhm.
just don't
Mhm.
recommend anywhere near that. So I thought I would also bring in one more research finding. So according to Lobbying and Nutrition Policy in Canada, a descriptive study on stakeholder interactions with government officials in the context of Health Canada's healthy eating strategy, from the 2019 Food Guide and Dietary Guidelines. So according to this study, they say that the guidelines and the food guide were less influenced by agriculture and food industries as they were in years past. They state, although, quote, lobbying from stakeholders from the food and beverage industry may have occurred during the development process of the food guide, it seems to have been have only been with other government officials or departments outside of the Office of Nutrition Policy and Promotion, and not during the revision process. So this is really, really good for the food guide, meaning that it is the most scientifically accurate food guide that we have. And so I just mentioned that there were some efforts to lobby the food guide from these stakeholders, but in the revision process, they were not allowed to sort of make any, I guess, efforts.
Yeah.
Yeah, that, I guess that just, yeah, that's the best thing we have to go off of.
Mm.
And
Yeah.
we can sort of be certain that for the most part, industry influence remains far away from these concerns, and they should, about public health for Canadians and for
Absolutely.
policies around health for
Absolutely.
Canadians.
Absolutely. We need to start looking at when anyone who's at the table who is making money on the health of humans, or the lacking of health of humans, for example, or the environmental destruction or anything like that, in my honest personal opinion, should not have a say in anything that has to do with federal policy. This is where nonprofits click in. This is where nonprofits have to go, okay, things were obviously not being done right before. There was obviously influence. We've taken too long, in my opinion, to get to a place where we know all of the data is showing that we need to see a more plant-based food system. We've seen this for a long time. We know that agriculture, or animal agriculture specifically, severely impacts the effect of climate change, or excuse me, exacerbates the effects of climate change. And we've known this for such a long time, and yet we're only just bringing science into the Canadian Food Guide. And I will say that one of my biggest things, and one of the things I'm so proud that we're doing at Canadians for Responsible Food Policy, is trying to operationalize that food guide. We have a petition going on so that we can understand where people are located in Canada who do support the Canadian Food Guide as it is right now, who do support a more plant-based food system. And I encourage everyone to go ahead and sign it. Again, it's on our website. And I think that is probably one of the very first steps that we're looking to start bringing more public education to the to Canadians, to start learning more about why it's important to follow the Canadian Food Guide as closely as possible, and then also operationalize it in the sense of actually making these foods available to people. And we'll definitely get into more podcasts when we're going to be talking a little bit about access to food throughout Canada as well. And I think it's very important. Every week, I should say that we're looking to bring in a new topic with new research to you, and that Maddie and I are going to be speaking about, or Maddie, myself, or myself with other guests as well, and just people who are doing similar work to Canadians for Responsible Food Policy. Another thing that I wanted to talk a little bit about, if you don't mind, Maddie, is really like the sort of the laid back manner that we have on the podcast. You'll notice that I'm literally almost in a closet room at this point because I'm still at my clients right now. I don't want this podcast to be some official thing that everyone is having. Like, I don't want this to be scripted. I want this to be as natural as possible. And I want us to just enjoy ourselves. Though some of these topics are going to be pretty serious, and some of these topics are very much pointing to some of the destruction around, and very dystopian topics. I think that it's important for us to note that we're young. We are going to try to make these changes as easily as possible. We're seeing the future with bringing in policy. We're seeing the horizon through all of the work that we're doing, and I want us to just relax and actually talk about the conversations as they happen. And I also want to hear from you folks. I want to hear from everyone who has anything to say about the podcast, good or bad. I actually don't really see any bad in feedback. This is our very first podcast. It's my very first podcast. It's Maddie's very first podcast. We don't know what we're doing. We just really want to bring you the research findings. And so teach us, senseis, teach us all of this world. Anyone who's checking in on a podcast to see if we're doing well or not. We actually do really want to hear your opinions. And I want you folks to understand that we're trying to do this as least scripted as possible. So the only thing you should expect from us is that we'll show up for you. You should expect to us that we'll bring you everything that we can, and we'll do everything that we can on this podcast. you should expect to have this information quoted and cited because Maddie's an academic, and I think she might not be too happy if I didn't quote things on our website about
Mhm.
the
Well, I
things
would
that
have a
we've
hard
cited.
time. I would have a hard time
Yeah.
finding the things that I would want to find, I will say.
Exactly. Exactly. And we want to make things accessible. This podcast is another level of us trying to service the public as we see is needed. That's what it is. And if you want to reach out to us, again, it's hello@responsiblefoodpolicy.ca. Feel free to check in there. There will be a comment section that we'll add into our podcast page on the website that you can just submit opinions, or if you want to hear about something, or if you want clarification about something, that is what we are here for. And so I guess we'll leave it at that. Maddie, is there anything else that you'd like to add for this week's podcast?
Um, I don't think so. Give me the knowledge. Give me the ideas.
And give me the answers and I'll just like do something with them. Perfect. Awesome. Folks, you can also follow us on social media. We're revamping our social media right now. And I'm so looking forward to connecting with you all on this other level in the podcast. And thank you all for tuning in and have a great day. Thanks, everyone.